A guy just bought this Lexus. It's in beautiful looking shape. He only paid $3,500 for it. Now it does have over 300,000 miles on it, and it's got kind of a misfire, and he said his code reader didn't give anything, so we're gonna try to figure out what's wrong. Realize even though it's old, the paint's in immaculate shape. And you can see here, it's a 98, and it was made in Japan. Aside from the normal wear and tear, the leather seats are still in excellent shape. The interior's in phenomenal shape. Got decent tires. The trailer hitch is hooked up to it. Even the gold is still in pretty good shape. Now basically this is a fancy Land Cruiser, right? It's the Lexus version. These things can run forever with the phenomenal V8 engine. And yeah, it sounds smooth. Listen to it. One of the best engines they ever made. The only downfall of this one, even though the check engine light is not, so we're gonna have to get the big scanner and look at some serious data. Now it's kind of hidden away on this. It's up here, black, so you can't really see it that well, but it's up here, right by your right leg. Now it's connected. So we'll do intelligent diagnosis. Just realize it's a 98, it's gonna take some time. The old cars have much slower communication than the newer ones. Got to do it manually, so we'll go to Lexus. And I can really feel it jiggling now. Do a smart scan. Notice there's no check engine light on. The only thing's on is a brake light, and that's because I got the brake on. If I take it off, even that goes off. There's no lights on, other than the warning light for the seatbelt, because I got the seatbelt off because I'm just sitting here analyzing. And you can see it's got a lot of mileage here. It's got 334,000 miles on it. Normally, you're not going to see too many problems with Lexus. The airbag system isn't working right. The tilt, ABS. But what he cares about is it's running weird. So we'll start with the ECM. Oxygen sensor heater circuit, bank 1, sensor 1. Now that isn't going to make it misfire. That is the heater. This is Tennessee. You don't need emissions testing every year. So if you live somewhere else, you would replace the oxygen sensor, bank 1, sensor 1. And the new heating element that's inside it would work, and that code would go away. But it isn't going to make it run any better. That's only for warming up the car. Once the car's warmed up, it's doing it. That's not the problem. Look at the ABS system. The anti-lock brake system says it's got abnormally high positive voltage, some crazy stuff there. So we'll check the battery and alternator, make sure that's okay. But I don't think that's the problem. We'll look at the tilt system, telescopic motor for the tilt. That isn't going to make it run weird either. Airbag system, SRS, open and driver squib circuit. That's for the airbag system. The airbags probably won't work, but that's not going to make it misfire. We're going to start by looking at absolute data. We're going to read the data stream. No, this is an older Lexus, in 98. We still got 107 points of data. So let's start looking at them. All color coded, and most of them, they're going pretty good. Now here's the interesting thing. You can feel it kind of rumbling, but look at the misfire count. They're all 0. So it's not actually misfiring, because none of them are showing a misfire. That's where what you feel can be numerous things. Say, oh, it's misfiring. It isn't running correctly, but it's technically not misfiring. There's no misfire codes. If this thing misfires, believe me, this thing's going to show you. It doesn't matter if it misfires once out of 10,000 tries. It'll show misfire one time. It would have number 1, and they're all 0. And it doesn't matter if we rev it up, or if we put it in gear, then put a little strain on it, nothing's misfiring. Now as we rev it up, the ignition advance is 18, but when we rev it up, it advances, so that's normal. The long-term fuel trim on bank 1 and 2 is almost perfect. It's only subtracting 0.03% for a car with 300-something thousand miles. That's kind of incredible that it's running that almost perfect, almost at 0. The MAP sensor's doing pretty good. It's close to the liter of the engine. It's a 4.7 liter engine. It's 4.81 grams per second. That's normal. The oxygen sensor tests are complete. Now here we can see the short-term fuel trim on cylinder number 1. It's subtracting 1.59% fuel. Now it's subtracting 3.9. Number 2 is it's subtracting. So it's actually running a little bit rich. Not rich enough to trip a code. Rich enough to make it jiggle a little. Because if it gets too much fuel, it's not going to burn completely. It's going to have incomplete combustion. See, it is moving around. Sometimes it's almost perfect. Sometimes it's subtracting 2.3, 3.3. With all this age, it could have dribbling injectors. They might need replacing. A lot of times cleaning will help. And we'll look at the rest of the data. There's nothing else that really shows a problem. Now it sounds so good, but that little jiggle, it would bother me too. This is almost a perfectly made vehicle, and that little imperfection, it would drive me nuts too. So I'm gonna get some of Bernie's cleaner. This stuff's kind of amazing. They invented it to clean fuel injection systems. And it's as simple as dropping the stuff in and driving the car. It'd take forever if you're putting gallons in, but this is just a little bit, so it'll just go in even without a funnel. Just take your time. It actually smells nice, kind of an addictive smell. It doesn't stink like most cleaners. Now we'll take it for a spin. Now realize this thing sat for 1.5 years. When a car sits for 1.5 years, there's no saying the pinholes on the fuel injectors could have some carbon built up, or the gasoline will actually congeal, turn into a gel. We'll see what happens. We're gonna take it on a highway, 70 miles an hour, half an hour. We'll see what happens. All right, we're at the end of a half-hour drive, 45 minutes, and we'll see what the data says. It doesn't seem to shake as much. Now, it hasn't been that many miles, but it's definitely not jiggling as much. The fuel trim on bank 2 is now 0%. Trim on bank 1 is 0%. Long-term and the short-term fuel trim is 0% on bank 1 and only minus 0.781. Now it's 0 on bank 2 too. So that little bit of driving is definitely clearing things up. The long term is 0 and the short term is coming closer to 0 than it was before. I'd still drive at 250 miles, but I mean, hey, and that short bit of driving, it's made a big difference. See, it's 0 for both. Then it subtracts just a little bit and then it goes back. It's definitely getting a lot better. There's 0.781. It's much better than it was before. So we know this thing sat for 1.5 years. He even showed me a picture of a mouse nest that was in the blower motor. He had to take it out and clean it because it was wobbling around. But this cleaner is fixing the problem. And this also goes to prove that people think their car is misfiring. Well, it's misfiring. It doesn't necessarily mean it is misfiring in a technical terms. As you saw, the machine showed 0 misfires from all, but you could feel it not running right. Well, that's because it was getting probably blobs of fuel from dirty fuel injectors because it sat for 1.5 years that we know of, maybe even longer. Who really knows the history of it? But just driving it for half an hour, 40 minutes with that cleaner has cleaned it out. It's running more efficiently now. If it would have been a simple misfire, which I thought maybe that's what it was before he brought it over, I would have seen misfire, say cylinder number 5. Then I would have taken a number 5 coil, put it on a number 1. Number 1 on 5, if the misfire moved, I knew the coil was bad. But that's not the case because it didn't actually have any misfires. It only had somewhat bad data on the fuel trims. Knowing that this thing sat for a long time, things will clog up inside. And plus it has 300-something thousand miles. The injectors probably are going to be somewhat clogged up from all that years in this cleaner that Bernie makes, the ATS. It'll dissolve all that crap in a very short period of time, as you just saw. So $3,500 for a vehicle like this, that looks like this, that runs like that, man, he got a deal. Yeah, it's got a lot of mileage, 300-something thousand miles. I've seen them with 500,000 miles on them, and they're still running okay. If you can find something like this, hey, even if you don't really need it, why not buy it? You get tired of it, you could sell it to somebody else, probably make a little money. All right, now Hondas have been known to have automatic transmission problems. We're going to check this one out. The owner thinks he might have a transmission problem in this 2013 Accord because sometimes it does a little judder, and when he takes off, sometimes it's got a little motorboat hesitation, then it takes off. So the first thing we're going to do is look at anything logical under the hood. This is the Earth Dream, so this is a little bit higher tech than the original Hondas. But it's a very good engine. You can see here it's a 2.4 liter. It's a reasonable size engine. Not a fan of those 1.5 liter engines. I think they're a little bit too small. Then they put turbos and GDI on them. Makes them too complex and they have problems. This is actually a very good engine. With most Hondas, the transmissions are the thing that often get to have problems. But we're going to look around, make sure there's something simple like a vacuum hose doesn't come off. I don't see anything there. And believe it or not, we're going to look at the air filter. Recently tried cleaning the throttle, but we'll look in here anyway. Well, it's not the filter. That's fine. One guy brought me one once. It failed the inspection in Texas. All I had was a clogged air filter. It sounds normal for one of these. And the reason you hear that little bit of noise is because it's an Earth Dream system. In Hondas, they often have noisy injectors on these. They're high pressure systems. You'll hear noises like this. Doesn't mean anything. Generally isn't the reason that they act up. It's normally more of a transmission problem. But since everything's run by computers, we got to plug our computer in to analyze the whole system. And in this case, we need the big fancy one because we're getting into really high-level diagnosis here. A cheap little scan tool isn't going to give you too much information on something like a transmission problem. So, We'll plug it in. We'll do intelligent diagnosis. A winning number. Maybe play that in the lottery, I don't know. And we'll do the smart scan. So here we go. All these different systems, it's going to go through them all. It's got a PGMFI. That might not be a transmission problem after all. Fuel injection computer system has codes, but the automatic transmission doesn't have any. So let's check that out. Okay, it might not be the transmission because here's the codes. Alternator low voltage, communication error, no charging malfunction, charging system low voltage. Let's do the simple thing. We'll turn it off, unplug the scanner because you don't want any voltage drain. Time for another machine, the battery alternator tester. First, make sure these are tight. I've seen them loose cause the whole problem, entire problem with it, just because these are loose or corroded. But they're clean and they're not corroded. Now, if you notice one thing, this is what I hate about Honda. Look at the size of that battery, it's tiny. They deliberately put tiny batteries in the car. Compare that to my Matrix battery. I don't know why, but Honda has this thing about putting tiny batteries in. Tiny batteries, it's just cheaper to make them. Look how much bigger my battery is, and it's got a smaller engine than the Honda. It's an Interstate. I'm not an Interstate fan. They have a tendency of making cheaper batteries, so we're going to start by checking that. Like that. Like that. You always have to pay attention to your battery and charging system. Modern cars, everything is run by computers, including the transmission. You get low voltage. It can do all kinds of squirrely things to your car. Now, at least on the positive side, transmission data was all green, so it's showing that it doesn't see any problems in the transmission. We're going to check the battery and charging system. So we will go to battery tester. Battery health. Regular flooded. It's a regular flooded battery. Not seeing if there's any kind of a short. No floating electricity, so that's good. We'll go by cold cranking, and in this case, the cold cranking's hiding under there. Get my head in there, try to read it. I could get my eye down there, and I could see 500. So, put it on 500. It's got a slide on it, and the slide is almost impossible to get where you want. 509, that's close enough. We'll see what it says. Battery life is only 47%. The actual starting current is only 350 cranking amps, and it's supposed to be 500. So I would say replace the battery, but we're going to check the alternator too. As you can see, what does the machine say? It says replace the battery. Realize in a modern car, just because the battery starts the car doesn't mean it's still good. Now in this case, we get 2 for 1. It says the starting voltage is normal. That means the start is working okay. So, now it's checking the alternator diode ripple. That's totally normal. And in this case, the charging voltage is high. Now, if it was low, there's a problem. In this case, it's high. And you might think, why is it high? When your battery is that weak, it has to get more electricity from the alternator. Normally, a good battery will start your car, the alternator immediately recharges it quickly, and then it just goes about its thing running the car. But if you got a weak battery, it puts out too much power to keep charging the weak battery. So that makes total sense, because I noticed on my other machine that it said charging voltage was fine when it was running. I knew it was working. You got to replace the battery. When you saw the diode ripple, that was fine. If it would have had bad diode ripples, that can make it charge too much. But the diode test showed it was fine. So, since the diode test said it's fine, overcharging means it's just a bad battery. It's weak. It has to be continually charged. It's like I had a friend back in the falls when I was a kid, and his father was a cheapskate. He'd never buy batteries in the winter, so he had 3 cars. He had 3 battery chargers. At night he'd plug them all in. He was too cheap to buy a battery, so he kept those things going and going. In those days they were simple cars, so it's a different story than it is today. They just had carburetors, not electronic ignition, so they didn't need that much power to run correctly. And they definitely did not have computer controlled electronic transmissions either, like this thing has. So in this case, the only thing this thing really needs is a new battery. Now, the owner of this car just informed me that he wished he had watched my videos earlier in his life, because when he bought this a few months ago, he also paid about $1,300 for an extended warranty, and then he finds out that every time he takes it somewhere, the guys say, well, your policy only pays $80 an hour labor, and most mechanics go anywhere from $120 to $180 an hour, and there's a $100 deductible for everything. Realize these extended warranties are often scams. They're what are called 50%ers, because if he paid $1,300, that meant that they probably made $650 commission usually 50% commission to the people that sell it to you, so you don't get much. I saw it in Houston all the time. I had a customer come to me with one, and I said, you need $350 worth of work. I call up the warranty company, and they said, well, we'll only pay $120 to fix it. So I just hung up. I told my customer, look, you can take it wherever you want. It's a $350 job, and they just said, we'll pay you. Don't worry about it. Stay away from these scams. Now, we're going to take it for a road test. Realize one thing. He bought this. We don't know what the history of this is. Have people fix things and not reset them. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use this new launch tool that I just got. I'm testing it out, and we're going to reset everything. It's typing something. I like the sound effects. We're going to clear the codes. Now we can see. We'll look at them all. Okay, the codes are all gone. Now we can road test it. Now it's a nice riding Accord. I always like driving these cars around. We'll see what kind of a shifting it does, if it acts up for me, but we haven't changed the battery yet either. They're very luxurious cars. They're efficient engines, but they have a reasonable amount of power. So here we go on a drag strip. Yeah, you heard those wheels started to spin and the traction control kicked in, but plenty of acceleration. On high speed, the transmission's going good. It's not particularly acting up. I roll the window up so there's less noise. Try to get it to act up. It's not particularly acting up now, but of course the computer's plugged in and any data that's weird will come out of it. They said it jolts when it gets around 10. We'll just slow down and see what happens. Coming up to the light, and I'll just slow down. We'll see if it's going to do it. Nobody's behind us, so we can go as slow as we want. That's pretty normal. See what it does when it takes off. And it sure takes off fine. We'll just leave it and see how it shifts. That was a good shift. That was a pretty smooth shift. Now, as you can see, the codes did not come back. Here we go. He's going to change the battery because 35%, and that's now. It's warm today. It's 60-something degrees. When it gets cold and snowy, it probably won't even start the car at all. But it's not the transmission that they thought it might have been. It had no transmission codes, and after we road tested, all the other codes didn't come back. Now, a lot of that can be when he had it on the recall. He did have them work on the sensor on the battery, and that shows how the charging's working. And I'm assuming what usually happens at the dealer is they didn't reset anything. The guy was in a hurry, he just bolted the part on and said, the car's done, go pick it up. I see that so much that they don't reset anything like they're supposed to because they're in a hurry, especially when it was a recall. You don't pay for a recall, they don't make any money, so they're in a big hurry. So anytime, if you have recall work done, my advice is if you know a guy like me with good scan tools, have them just scan it, reset all the codes, then you know it's starting from square one, so you can analyze further correctly and won't end up replacing things that don't need replacing. If you want to buy a good scan tool, go ahead and do it. Or if you don't, have a mechanic do it. But have them do it because when they do stuff at the dealer, half the time, they don't reset anything. I had a guy last time I was in Tennessee, he brought me his Lexus and I started checking it out. He just bought it and he said, oh my God, look at all those codes. What did I do wrong? And I said, look, these are all squirrely communication codes. At some point, somebody worked on something, changed the battery. I reset them, and then 6 months later, what? Nothing. He didn't have any codes. You gotta reset them with a fancy tool once the work is done, because if you don't, it's going to confuse people and they'll think there's something wrong when there isn't. He was worried he got a bad car. No, he didn't. It's an excellent car, and all it needs now is a battery. He can wait if he wants, but since it's his wife's car and he's worried that something might happen, he's just going to go get a battery right now, and that'll be the end of it. Here we got a typical problem. A nice Camry, but when it's cold, he backs up, you can get a clunking noise in the front. And of course, at the dealer, they tried to sell him the farm. So let's jack it up and check it out. Now, these are real easy to jack up, because as you can see under here, there's a nice solid lump right in the middle. You can put your jack on right there, nice and solid. You gotta jack up one side and the other. Not these Camrys, you can jack them up right in the middle, so you got all kinds of working room on both sides. No, this vehicle was bought pre-owned, it was used, so we don't know the history what the previous owner did. It's awful new for a Toyota, so I don't expect to feel anything, and there isn't anything that's really worn. We'll check the other side, and just as I suspected, there's no real play on this side either. Let's take off the wheel and check it. If you don't want to put the expense into air tools, electric impacts are perfectly fine for doing wheels and stuff like that. They're awful big, you can't fit them in tiny holes, but they're great for taking tires off. So nobody gets crushed. There. Now we can check it all out. Now, unlike cars in the past, all modern cars have no grease fittings. So you got to check all the rubber bushings to see what kind of shape they're in. And here's something I don't like. Okay, the stabilizer bolt. They used to make them out of metal. Guess what? Now it's a hunk of plastic. Really, Toyota, you didn't have to go that cheap. Now, often as they age, these rubber joints here on the lower control arm, they'll often go. Now you can see it's got those little bitty thin cracks in it, but that's totally normal. I've had more people come in, oh, the dealer told us, look, there's little cracks, you need to replace all that. Expensive job. No, my 94 Celica has worse cracks than that, and it still works perfectly fine. You'll often get superficial cracks. If they're cracked in half and they're making a lot of noise, yeah, but these are totally fine. Here's a motor mount, and a good way of checking that is just starting the car up. See how it's pretty stationary? If it would have wobbled up and down a whole bunch, it would mean it was cracked. But it isn't. Now when we check the bottom side here, here's a lower ball joint. But as you can see, it's perfectly dry. It's not ripped or torn. There's nothing wrong with that. And the tie rod's nice and stiff. It's not clunking or bouncing around. So let's pop the hood and check the top of the strut. We're here in Tennessee and you might say, what the heck are those? Well, those are supposed to make noise so that the deer don't crash into it. That's not the source of this noise because humans can't hear that frequency. Can't say whether they work or not, but he's never hit a deer, so why tempt fate? I'd leave him on too. The upper strut mount is here, and it's all rubber inside. And if they crack, what happens is they'll clunk because the metal will then hit metal because the rubber's ripped. But when they do, this will sink down when you jack the car up in the air. As you can see, it hasn't sunk. I'll go to the other side. Same thing. That strut mount's nice and solid. It's not ripped. And you won't expect them. Those things can go 10, 15 years before they break. And this thing isn't that old. So let's pull off this wheel. Off it comes. Do the same process here. Even though it's plastic, it's still solid. The stabilizer bolt. And we'll look down here. You can see this is pretty much the same as the other one. You can see small striations, but there's really nothing wrong with it. And as we look under here, the ball joint's solid again. It's not leaking grease. Everything's pretty solid. The only thing wet is because you got the car washed. So there's no obvious structural problems. Now I have seen this before, and it's often the rubber bushings just will make a noise once in a while because instead of, like when I was a young mechanic in the 60s where they had grease fittings, you'd grease them, the grease would go inside and lubricate it. These are just bare rubber on metal. And as they age, often you can get a clunk now and then. So, here's something I've been doing for years. No, I don't spray aloe on the car. It's an empty bottle. The aloe works good on your skin. I don't think it can do much to a car. I use this AT205 reseal. It is a polymer. It rejuvenates rubber. So, simple process. Poke a hole in it. Open up the empty aloe bottle and pour it in. Now it looks like water, but it isn't. It's a polymer. It rejuvenates rubber. So what we're gonna do is, all the rubber parts, we're gonna spray. And especially where there's any kinds of bushings. Like down here in the middle, right here. We're gonna spray those. There's one side, you can't see it very well, but there's another side too. We're gonna spray that. Any place where there's a fulcrum. There's also one in here, we'll spray that. And just for kicks, we'll spray the top. This is all rubber. And we'll do the same here. And the strut mount here too. Now what happens is, this rejuvenates rubber. It gets it more pliable. So if it's clunking because it's not pliable, hard rubber, hit metal, it can make a clunk. Now, we already found out it's structurally safe, doesn't shake on a high or anything. When we look at the tires, you can see they're evenly worn. There's no cups, they're not worn in the middle, and then big on the outside or big on the outside and worn in the middle. They're very evenly worn. So there's real no suspension problem with this vehicle whatsoever. Now it didn't do it when he originally bought it used. It only started doing it about a year ago. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. We're gonna take it for a road test now, but it's warmer, so it might not make any noise. But that shows me that it's nothing that's really structurally wrong with the vehicle. Say it had been in a big wreck. Well, when he bought it, it would have shown up right then. you would have heard the noise. And it went over a year without doing it, so got the wheels on, now we'll take it for a spin. Well, here we go. Now this is how they're supposed to sound, nice and quiet. Look, it's fixed, it's fixed. Who knows, only time will tell. So, it's not making it now. If it comes back, it doesn't mean anything. But let's say it goes away for 9 months or a year. Amazon sells this stuff. Buy a bottle of it, spray rubbers, all with it. Any kind of rubber. I put it on windshield seals. Your windows where they roll up and down, that rubber can deteriorate. This keeps them from deteriorating in the first place. Got a lot of uses. Some guys even put it on the grips of their golf clubs. And then the sweat of their hands doesn't eat it up. So, hey, now you know how to check out a front end, see if you have a problem. Now he doesn't have to worry about the dealer telling him, well, he needs to replace the control arms for $1,500. It's stable, there's nothing wrong with it. Sometimes a little noise doesn't mean all that much, but it can make a big bill if you go to the wrong place to get it analyzed. So why not do like I just did? Figure it out yourself. Save a ton of money. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.